So guys, welcome along to tonight's Diabetes Chat. We've got our research event, and I think Chris has just beautifully just summed it up. It's lovely to just hear firsthand the amazing research that our speakers who are with us tonight are doing or have conducted their research, and it's nice to learn a little bit about them and what they've done and how to maybe get involved if the research hasn't been published yet. And it's just great to connect. It's been nice last couple of weeks working behind the scenes setting up tonight, so I'm really pleased to have our guest speakers. We have 5 guest speakers tonight. We have Dr. Jill Charlton from Sheffield. We also have Professor Simon Heller. We also have Emma Innes and Belinda Moore, and like I said, all the way from Australia in Victoria. And to finish our evening, we have Tracey Oorschot from Sydney as well. We've got 5 different types of research, and it'd be interesting to hear all from our guys tonight. Each speaker will have 15 minutes to talk and share their research. And then if there is any time within the 15 minutes, we might have a little chat or some Q&A if anyone has any questions on the panel. Or you can tweet along DiabetesChat, hashtag DiabetesChat, and we can get the question or comment to the guys. Or at the end of the evening, we do have an opportunity for a open panel Q&A from 9:45 till about 10ish tonight. UK time, and if the guys that are speaking aren't available to be on that time, then that's absolutely fine. We'll jot down the questions and we'll tweet them directly, and then maybe they can interact with you to respond to your comment or question, if that's all right. Does that sound good? I hope
Sounds
so.
good to me.
You know what I love about the research event as well is that you get to, like you say, hear firsthand of all the amazing research that's happening. It might intrigue you to get involved in some diabetes research. And also from my point of view as well, it's I can just sit back and enjoy, and I don't have to prepare the questions. I can just listen to the amazing guest speakers share their research with us. So let's kick off tonight. Our first guest speaker is Dr. Jill Charlton. Jill is a senior research fellow at the University of Sheffield and has had an interest in measuring and valuing health. One of Jill's main projects that she is working on right now is the HypoResolve. And as part of that project, a new questionnaire has been developed that can be used to measure the impact hypos have upon a person's quality of life. And I think that reflects almost all of us in the diabetes world in dealing with hypos and the impact of them on our quality of life. So without further ado, hello Dr. Jill Charlton. Welcome to the Diabetes Chat.
Hi everybody. Thanks ever so much to have the opportunity to speak to you all this evening or this morning, wherever it is you are in the world.
Hi, Jill.
I'm not sure whether you want me to give a bit of summary of what I've been working on, or whether you've got some specific questions.
So you've got 15 minutes, so it's all down to you really. So if you want to maybe introduce yourself, tell us a little bit of background to you and how you've got into diabetes, and then you can carry on with telling us about some of the research you've done and the HypoResolve, of course.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm currently working on a project called HypoResolve, which is truly a fantastic project and a real privilege to be a part of that. So HypoResolve is a very, very large project which involves a number of different academic institutions, but also pharmaceutical companies, but most importantly, patient advocacy, to try and understand about hypoglycemia in so many different ways. So there's some fantastic research going on, and if people want to know more, I really would encourage them to have a look at the project website, and I'm sure we can pop that link up in the chat. So I'm involved in one aspect of that enormous project, and that is to try and quantify, so give a number to hypoglycemia and its impact upon quality of life. And I realise that concept can come across as very strange, like how on earth are we going to give a number to something? And regrettably, numbers drive our lives. You know, there's so many parts of our lives are dictated to by numbers. But one of the ways in which we understand things further is by sort of looking at group level data, but also individual level data, which can really help inform discussions between a clinician and somebody with lived experience, and vice versa. You know, let's not forget this is a two-way opportunity here. So in developing a questionnaire to measure quality of life, we work alongside a number of different people, and most crucially within our unit, we're great believers in working with people with lived experience. I don't live with diabetes myself. I can't profess to truly understand what it is like, and all the different facets, the things that have to be thought about day in, day out, and those thoughts which are always there, you know, and I can't profess to truly understand that. And the only way in which I can try and understand things further is by working with people who are happy to collaborate with us, and to make sure that what we're doing makes sense but is also meaningful. And that's with all types of people, obviously people with lived experience. We're very fortunate to work with colleagues who are interested in the health economics component, obviously clinical academics, health psychologists. You know, it's a really sort of collaborative venture, I guess. So in order for us to be able to develop a new questionnaire, the first thing that we do is to talk to people with that lived experience. So what we did, it seems like a long time ago now, but what we did sort of at the start of the pandemic was to conduct some interviews with people who experience hypos. And we really wanted to find all the different ways in which hypos can impact upon their lives, be that around physical functioning, what happens during a hypo or building up to a hypo, coming out of a hypo, then all the sort of psychological functioning components, all the feelings, all the emotions associated with that. And again, this can be either if you've had a hypo or if you're worried about a hypo happening, and all the different ways in which hypoglycemia impacts upon people's social functioning as well. And we identified a number of different themes, and what we wanted to do is kind of really develop a framework for what hypoglycemia and quality of life might be. And we used that framework to then come up with a long list of draft questions which we could include within a questionnaire. And when we did that, we realised that there's lots and lots of ways in which we can ask about the same thing. So it's a bit like that old adage, there's many ways in which you can skin a cat. So we could ask things, I feel happy, or we could say I felt sad. We could say I felt angry. We could say I felt frustrated. We could say I felt annoyed. And I realised that there's nuances between all of those. So one of the things that we did next was to test out all these draft questions again with people who would be filling the questionnaire in future, so people with lived experience. And they really gave us some valuable insights into how the questions are interpreted, whether we should ask about things in a frequency sense, like how often people might feel something, or how often people might experience something, or whether we should ask it in a severity sense, if it does happen, how much of a problem it might be, or how bad it might be. And we also got some insight as well as to how the recall period, the time that people should think about, or rather the time that we ask people to think about when completing these questionnaires. So should we say, we'd now like you to think about the last week, or we'd now like you to think about the last month. So really all the content of this questionnaire that we've developed has been informed by people with lived experience at every single step. So at the moment, what we're doing is we're testing out our draft questions. So we've got a shorter list of draft questions, but there's still an awful lot within it. There's 40 questions at the moment, and we're testing those out in a survey to find out in a mathematical sense which of these questions work the best. And the analysis that we'll do on that data is one piece of evidence that we use in decision making in order to pick out which questions we should include in the final questionnaire. And there's lots of other bits of information that we bring into that decision making process. So one thing we've already done is a translatability assessment. So that is an indicator of how well questions might be translated into other languages. We also have a fantastic patient advisory committee who also provide insight in their opinions about which are the most useful questions that can be brought in. And we have an external advisory group who give us advice into the project. So these people who might be experts in health economics or clinical academic experts or health psychologists, and we get their views as well. And then finally, we have a fantastic scientific group. So these are people I'm working alongside, both in the University of Sheffield, but also other institutions and companies who bring in their valuable insight, either as instrument developers or, as I say, clinical academics. So we use a whole host of evidence to help support that final decision-making process into which questions we keep in the questionnaire. Now, there's a final step of what we're going to do. So we will have a final questionnaire that's used to measure quality of life, but then we're taking things one step further. So after that final questionnaire, which will probably be about 20 questions, I think. I'm predicting a little bit now, but I think it'll be about 20 questions long. We're going to make a shortened version of that. And that shortened version is where we call this a preference-based measure. So this is where we get weights. So it's how important certain aspects of the questionnaire are when we consider it with respect to valuing health. So it's a particular type of questionnaire that's using cost-utility analysis. So it's probably going to be more useful for clinical trials. So at the end of all this, we'll have two questionnaires, one longer one, which gives us that bit more detail, and a shorter one, which is if I'm truthful, probably going to be used a bit more usefully in the trial sense. And what I'm really hoping further down the line is that these questionnaires become adopted within routine care, because I think that there's a real opportunity for them to be a springboard between decision making between people with lived experience and clinicians who are trying to sort of understand what is happening to that individual, either day to day or week to week, but in between appointments. You know, that snapshot that they're getting could be so much more enriched, I think, with questionnaires such as these. And I think that we've got in the future real opportunities to understand that a little bit better, understand that data, and work with the people like yourselves in the diabetes community to think about, well, actually, how are we going to display this data? How is it going to be useful for all parties to understand what aspects are really impacting upon people's quality of life? And that will vary from one person to another, and it will vary as well depending upon a whole host of different things. And there's already some fantastic work being undertaken to try and understand the impact of things like new types of insulin or new devices such as CGMs, and what role they play in quality of life. And I think we need to recognise that quality of life can mean different things for different people, and that's okay, and people will have different levels of importance about certain components. So for me, I'm quite a sociable person, and one of the main things for me is around quality of life is me being able to spend some time with friends and family and enjoy that time. But that might be different from the person, sat in the next room from me. So I think questionnaires like this have an opportunity to be used to help inform a further conversation. So, I realise that sometimes trying to put a number on somebody's life and somebody's experience can come across as being a little bit insulting, but I hope that in working with people with lived experience in every step of the way of developing these things, that I hope we're still able to capture the crux of what's important to people. So I'll probably leave it at that and invite people to ask any questions.
Thank you so much, Jill. That was so fascinating. I just wanted to just to clarify. So obviously the questionnaire at the minute is around 40 odd questions, but the idea is to reduce it down to around 20 questions. And then will this questionnaire be provided nationally for all areas to access? So then, like you say, they can use it at the consultations or in between to kind of get them snapshot opportunities of how's it going, rather than just that number, isn't it? It can enable that discussion.
Yeah, so you are right. At the moment, it is 40 questions in it, but that's because we're testing them out. So we know that some of the questions in it will correlate very highly with each other. So we know that they're kind of asking about the same sort of thing. So we wouldn't want to include lots of questions like that. And the reason we don't want to include lots of things like that, it's a real pain to fill questionnaires in, and nobody wants to be sort of filling in pages and pages of a questionnaire. So we do need to think about what we call response burden as well, because otherwise people don't want to fill them in, so that it becomes a painful thing for people to do. So in terms of what's going to happen in the future with the questionnaire, well, it's been driven by this much larger project that I mentioned, HypoResolve, but we know in other parts of healthcare, certainly in the UK, that questionnaires are used routinely, and that people do have the opportunity to see that information, and that information can help, like I say, clinical decision making, a dialogue rather between someone with lived experience and a clinician. This is true in, for example, there's certain gynecological conditions where it happens. There's also in around orthopedic care, so knee surgery and hip surgery. And my wish really is that in the UK that we could get better at doing that with diabetes numbers and diabetes questionnaires. And I think we need to remember that these numbers aren't ours. They don't belong to me as a researcher. They don't belong to a clinician. They belong to the people who are filling in these things. And I think if I'm honest, that's where the certain aspects of healthcare can do better. We're making great strides in so many things, but at the moment, to me, it doesn't seem like they all fit together. So there's lots of pieces of the jigsaw. And we're not trying to make that big picture. We're not trying to link the bits together. So my hope is that it becomes part of a routine, what we call a routine data set, where people are asked to fill it in every clinical appointment, or are asked to fill it in on a regular basis. But there's lots of work to be done around that, and that whole process, and that sort of area of implementation science is doing really well in some health conditions, but I wonder if maybe we need to push harder in the diabetes community for something like that.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Jill, for coming on today and sharing your background and your amazing research within the HypoResolve. If anyone has any questions or comments to Jill, you can hashtag DiabetesChat, or you can, of course, tag Jill into it, and I'm sure she'll, in her own time, get back to you. And if you can post up the link as well, or send it to us again, Jill, we can retweet and and get that up, and people can go have a look if that's all right.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Brilliant stuff, guys. So that was Dr. Jill Charlton, our first speaker of the evening on our Diabetes Chat research event. Our next speaker is Professor Simon Heller. And Chris, were you going to introduce Professor Simon Heller, if I remember rightly?
I was.
Over to you, my friend.
All right. Well, welcome, Professor Heller. This a little bit about that, or about Professor Heller, Simon. He's a professor of clinical diabetes at the University of Sheffield. Research interests including the responses that people have to hypoglycemia and hypoglycemia unawareness. Also conducting research into interventions to encourage more effective diabetes self-management, which is always the big challenge. Everybody should remember that 99% of the diabetes management that people do is not at the at least immediate direction of a physician or clinician. So, most of the time people with diabetes are on their own. So self-management is clearly important. And also, Professor Heller was one of the lead investigators who developed the Daphne course, which is in the UK. It's not something we have here in the US, and I'm actually a little bit jealous because I wish that I'd had an opportunity to take one. So without further ado, welcome, Professor Heller, and the floor is yours to tell us about what you're sort of working on right now.
Thank you, Chris, and good evening, everybody. I don't have to introduce myself because you've done a wonderful job of introducing me. So what I thought I'd do is just start a little bit and describe my own personal story, not as somebody with diabetes, but as somebody who's had the privilege and honor to work with people actually since 1983, which is a long, long time ago, and I'm still doing it. But I think what I'd like to convey to people is just the excitement of doing clinical research, of actually answering questions which occur to you when you're talking to people with diabetes and they have an issue and you read about it and you say, I just wonder. And then if you're lucky enough to get the funding and the money, then you can design experiments to answer those questions and see if you can change practice. And I've had the privilege of managing to do that. So I'll just talk a little bit about how that happened and what we learned and how we've taken it forward. So I wanted to become a cardiologist, actually. I was working in Nottingham in about 82, and I couldn't do the cardiology job for a bit, so I went and did a bit of diabetes. I knew absolutely nothing, but I had an inspirational leader called Robert Tattersall, and he was very famous because he brought blood glucose monitoring to the world. He and another doctor in London were given this technology, which wasn't very portable, and they realized that it could be used by people to measure their glucose themselves. Now, everybody here thinks they take it for granted, but what's really interesting, if you read the history of diabetes that he wrote, when this was introduced into Britain, people said, oh no, this is really dangerous. We can't let people measure their glucose. The doctors are the smart ones. They have to choose the insulin, and then in those days they made people eat the same amount of carbs every day, including children, to match the insulin that the doctor had chosen. Ridiculous. It's difficult to believe that intelligent people could have done that. But he realized that it could set people free, although, as Chris has hinted, what we ask of people with type 1 diabetes is extraordinary. I think it's probably the most challenging condition because of what it asks people to do in terms of adjusting their insulin, counting their carbs, and they do that every meal, every day of their lives, things that most of us couldn't even imagine. Anyway, he sent me a couple of papers, said, I think you should do some research, and I didn't think I'd be terribly good at it, but he sent me some papers on hypoglycemia. And the paper said, well, 1 in 4 people with type 1 diabetes after 20 years lose their warnings of hypoglycemia. And in those days, nobody knew exactly why that was. And so we did some experiments in Nottingham, and we lowered the glucose in the laboratory using what we call a glucose clamp, lowering the glucose. And we compared people who had their warnings without their warnings. And what we discovered, which was just fascinating, is that people who had their warnings began to make adrenaline, epinephrine as we can call it, and got symptoms at a glucose of about 3.5, 55 milligrams per deciliter. And when we measured brain reaction, the brain began to become impaired actually at around 50. So they had plenty of time. But when we tested people who lost their warnings, they first had their brain function, which went abnormal, but they didn't react with their adrenaline and their symptoms till about 2.5, 45 milligrams per deciliter. So that explained to us why people had an awareness. And what we didn't know was why. And I was working with a professor of physiology in Nottingham, and he didn't have diabetes, he had a control. He said, you know what, the first time I was a control, so he was made hypo, he said, I felt terrible. But the second time, my warnings went to, I didn't feel bad. I didn't sweat, I didn't shake. And so in thinking about it, I said, I wonder if hypoglycemia itself might take those warnings away. I was working as a trainee in Nottingham. I couldn't do that experiment. So I came out to the US, to St. Louis, working with a guy with Phil Craw. And I said, I want to test this theory. And he said, okay, you can do it in my lab. And we took medical students. We paid them because in America, to do research, you did that. And then on one morning, we made them low. And the afternoon, we made them hypoglycemic. And the next morning, when we tested them, they were unaware of their hypoglycemia. And so we showed that repeated hypoglycemia adjusts the body. And therefore, that's how, at least one of the things that you get impaired awareness. And then we said, well, if you could avoid hypoglycemia, you'll get your warnings back. And that was done by other people, because it shows how experiments are done by a number of people to build what we know. And we thought, we've sorted it. But of course, the problem was, once they started treating themselves again, they became hypoglycemic. So impaired awareness is still a big problem. Of course, technology has made a huge difference. But even more interesting, closed loop, the artificial pancreas, which are now being used around the world, it may stop hypoglycemia for sure, but people still have the impaired awareness. So we're trying to work out why people who don't have any hypoglycemia, once they've had the problem, we can't completely sort it out. And the experiments, the big study we're about to do, which is an American study, and we're very fortunate that we applied for some money to the NIH, the big research arm in the US, and 10 centers around the world are going to put their heads together and try and design an experiment, a big trial, possibly involving hundreds of people, to see if we can find out what the problem is, and we're going to fix it. So we had our first meeting today because I've been privileged to be on the organizing group, and we're going to spend the next few months designing a trial to be run in the US, in Australia, actually, in Melbourne, and in Sheffield, and in Leicester in the UK. And it's going to be very exciting. And if those of you on the line have impaired awareness, you may well be able to participate in our experiment, our study, huge trial worldwide, which will start hopefully in September, October next year, after we plan.
I'd love it if you tweet a link to that, because I'm actually one that's not completely unaware, but vaguely unaware. It depends kind of time of day and circumstances. So I'd appreciate a link to that if you could at some point.
Oh yeah, well, once we've decided exactly what we're going to do, we are going to recruit from across the whole of the north of England, and we hope people will be prepared. I have to say that you will have to be prepared to have be made hypoglycemic in the lab, so we can measure all your responses. But it isn't too terrible. I've been made hypoglycemic myself in the laboratory. It's very safe, although you do have to have needles in your arm and stuff. But luckily,
I'm used to that at this point. As diabetics get us bloods taken often enough.
that's true. It's true. Anyway, good. Well, we have our first recruit for a study we haven't even finished designing yet. So
Awesome.
the second, I just want to talk a little bit about the Daphne project, because if you said to me what's the best thing that you've done in research, I would say it is bringing the Daphne course from Germany. Let's be clear, we didn't invent it, but you remember I talked about blood glucose monitoring came in the early 1980s. The Germans, Michael Berger and his wife Ingrid Muhlhauser, were working in Dusseldorf, and they realized straight away, unlike British doctors at the time, that they could use this technology to train people to self-manage. Because once you could measure your glucose, and before that, people had to test their urine. In fact, I still remember doing a children's camp in '82 when I started doing diabetes, and these kids had to measure their urine glucose, and that's all we had to go on. You won't be surprised to know that they collapsed frequently from hypoglycemia, despite so-called smart Alex doctors doing it. But anyway, Michael said, we can train people. We can teach them to eat whatever they want, because in those days, everybody had to try to eat the same amount of carbs every day. But he and Ingrid said, no, look, what we do is they measure their glucose, they work out how much insulin they're going to need for the carbs they're going to eat, and they can adjust their dose and calculate it themselves. And everybody said, don't be stupid. They did a trial in Germany, they did trials in Russia, and they showed it worked. And guess what? 15 years later in the UK, nobody had realized this. People were still made to eat the same amount of food every day. And actually, glucose levels were terrible in the UK. Michael Berger gave a talk, and he was so rude about how bad our care was that Sue Roberts from Newcastle, Stephanie Amell from King's, and myself, we said, let's bring our teams and go to Dusseldorf. And we went. It was amazing. People loved the course, and we brought it back. The Germans helped us translate it into English, and we put a group together, did a trial in the UK with funding from our charity, Diabetes UK. We got psychologists, Claire Bradley and Jane Spate, who now lives in Australia. And I think Jane did her PhD at the time on a quality of life measure, which we used. And we showed that it could lower glucose levels, it could improve quality of life dramatically, and it changed practice in the whole of the UK. And it's now taught in around 50% of all the hospitals. Sadly, not all of them, although many offer structured education. And I'm going to just stop there, but I want to sort of say it's been so great to be able to do clinical research, which makes a difference. But without the people who were brave enough to take part in our experiments, we would have no research. And it's an opportunity to thank everybody for participating, but I hope you can see that it can make just a huge difference. And I'll be quiet.
Well, thank you, Professor Heller, for all of that work. I'll jump in and say that I've been clamped and had my blood glucose pushed down very low for a number of reasons in a couple of different studies. So I can testify that it's not, it's obviously well managed. The procedure is established. Obviously, I'm still here and speaking to you, and not, at least as far as I'm aware, cognitively impaired, although some people may disagree.
I was being nice, Chris.
But I was actually in the clinical trial for, I believe, what is in the UK Ogluo. It's Gvoke in the US. the glucagon that's pre-mixed and ready-made.
Oh yeah, that's really
stable.
Good. Yeah.
The testing for that was obviously doing the clamp and pushing your blood sugar all the way down, and then turning the insulin off and giving you the glucagon and comparing it to the standard kit.
How high do they let you go in those trials, Chris? You know, when they bring you back up again?
Well, with the glucagon trial, they actually pushed you down to about 2.5-ish, if I'm doing the conversion right in my head.
You are. 2.5 is as low as you dare go, really.
Yeah. And then give you the glucagon, and I rebounded, I want to say, close to up to 20.
That's
from the ouch! I can feel that.
from the glucagon, and then obviously they wait and let you sort of renormalize. You restart your normal insulin, and they make sure that you're fed and that your blood sugar is stable and in a safe place before they let you leave the clinic, so that they're not worried about you crashing when you're driving home or anything. And the other study that I was in was actually looking at hypoglycemia unawareness. It was actually testing the same stuff, the Ogluo, but in a continuous infusion over a long-term or a long period of time, over a period of weeks, to see if it was possible to have that restore some awareness by providing a little bit of extra cushion to keep you from going low as often. And so, as I said, I've had it done multiple times. It's not dangerous. If you're interested, keep an eye out for the sign up, because none of this research happens without people volunteering for it.
Yeah, exactly. We'll need people, but we hope, and I should say that this study may study up to 500 or 600 people around the world to see if we can really get to the bottom of it and see if we can find treatments which will make a difference.
Yeah, which that's huge, especially with as much as the clamps actually cost to run.
Oh yeah, it's NIH is spending a lot of money, which we're very grateful for. That's for sure.
Thank you, Professor Heller, for sharing that. And if anyone has any questions, you can directly send him a message. So click on his profile and send him a message, or you can tweet DiabetesChat, and we'll get that to him, even the open forum Q&A at the end, or we'll tweet them on to him. But honestly, thank you so much. And Alex has just sent a tweet and just said, I've got my Daphne course booked in the end of November. Thank you so much for the work you're doing in getting it to the UK. Thank you so much. And that's from Alex.
Good, Alex. Thank you. It's a real reward to hear that, actually. And I hope they both enjoy it and it makes a difference.
Brilliant. So our next guest speaker, guys, is Emma Innes. And Emma is a part-time PhD student at the University of Worcester. She also worked at the university as a senior lecturer. Prior to this, she was a lead diabetes specialist nurse. Emma's PhD research is on the concerns regarding the experiences of developing DKA, which of course we all know is a life-threatening complication of diabetes. So without further ado, welcome Emma to the panel.
Hi, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. So my background is nursing, as you say, so that's really where I suppose my interest for DK has been piqued over many years of hospital experience. I'm a part-time student just going into year 5, so I've done all my data collection now and in the process of sort of analysing and starting to write things up. But I just really wanted to sort of share where going with my research and why I thought it was important from the gap really in the literature. And some of that really is born from, I suppose, my clinical experience and meeting people repeatedly when they come into hospital with recurrent diabetic ketoacidosis. So that was one of my selection criteria, that it couldn't just be DK at the point of diagnosis. It needed to have occurred at least once. So I started my research in about 2018 and was just about to get going. Just got my HRA ethics, which was fairly time consuming, and then COVID appeared on the horizon and really sort of threw a curveball about how I could access teams, because I wasn't actually working day to day in clinical practice. I was in the university at that point. So I had to really think about how I was going to recruit people living with type 1 diabetes who'd had DK, and so amended all of my ethics, and actually then went out to social media to recruit all of my participants. And as other people have said this evening, it's really all about the participants and, you know, their willingness to give their time and the willingness to share their experience and stories. So as I was working up my ethics, I also had support from several people living with diabetes who commented on my sort of HRA protocol, looking at the language used, looking at the language particularly in the sort of questions. So I did semi-structured interviews for it. And as I say, it was about meeting people repeatedly, you know, time and time again, and you'd go and have some conversations about, you know, how to, I'm using vertical quotes here, manage diabetes, support for education, etc. And it was really, really apparent the more I thought about this afterwards, and I think taking a step back from direct practice enabled me to do that you realise that there is a lot more to DK. Actually, the manifestation in hospital is just the tip of the iceberg, and it's everything that's under the water. And that's what really I've been sort of finding out and investigating with the participants as well. And, you know, the drive for that is we know that DK does carry some risk of mortality in the short term for people, and also in the next sort of few years after developing it. So it's thinking about how can we try and reduce that down again in that population with type 1 diabetes. And whilst the causes of it obviously are multifactorial, you know, we do need insulin. That is one of the causes. It's the, as I say, the underlying psychological, sociological deprivation, educational attainment and levels, and just life. When you listen to people talk about how challenging and difficult it is to live day in, day out with a condition, as you know, we've heard earlier about having to carb count, make dose adjustments, etc. There's no getting away, there's no day off from this as well. So what I really wanted to do when I started looking at the literature was try and explore the experience of people who have had DK on more than one occasion. So there's lots in the literature about the social, the psychological, the economic burden of developing DK from a sort of a hospital perspective, societal perspective. But there's very little about what it is to actually go through that experience. So I'm using my sort of semi-structured interviews to explore that. So they are very unstructured, really. So I did a round about 18 months ago, and I've just repeated the second round. So I'm particularly interested in looking at experience of people over time as well. So something called temporality, and that fits with the sort of philosophy that I'm using, which is phenomenology, which is my underpinning elements of my research. So, and to help me do that, I'm using a French philosopher called Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who used to live on the left bank, and he sort of spent a lot of time with sort of Simone de Beauvoir and Sartre, etc. So real sort of avant-garde thinkers into the sort of 1940s, 50s in Paris as well. So really stretching how we understand the body and the mind and how they're sort of linked. And he was very much that they're very intertwined. So rather than separating out mental health and physical health, it's thinking about this embodiment as people take on board their diabetes management. And when I first started my PhD, I was, going to change the world with what we're going to do at the end of this. But my supervisors have very much got me to focus on the here and the now with my participants and the research and the information gained, and then we'll see what needs to sort of happen in the longer term to support and adjunct all of the education out there for people. So I say I went out for recruitment after I got all of my ethics through, and I recruited actually all via Twitter. So these were people who self-selected. My criteria were that you had to be 18, you had to have type 1 diabetes, and you had to have had DK more than once, so at another time than at the point of diagnosis, and that you had to be in the UK healthcare system. In hindsight, I don't think it really made a great deal of difference if I'd gone out internationally, and I did have some interest as well when it went out on Twitter about people wanting to participate. But I think those are just some of the things I've learned a little bit as a researcher as time's gone on. So what I'm doing now is I'm using something called hermeneutics. So you basically take your interview data and really immerse yourself in it. You go back and forth looking for phenomena. So looking for the surprise in the data, that what are you not expecting? So you move away from, for example, being a nurse here, although I do bring some of myself as a nurse as I interpret things, but it's not making the assumptions and jumping to those initial conclusions as you go forth. And so the data were presented with quotes. There'll be some little sort of mini stories from there. So I don't want to release those just yet, but those will be sort of coming. And I think that the surprise I got was about the experience of how participants perhaps interact with healthcare professionals when they're actually in the midst of DK, the value that they see that healthcare professionals might put on them. So this is about perhaps particularly non-specialists, so the people that you're likely to meet in an emergency department or an acute medicine unit who may not be as expert in diabetes as your diabetes team. And I think one of the other things I'm picking up is about the fact of belonging to places and the importance of having a familiar team, continuity of care, etc. So those are just some very brief things that I wasn't particularly expecting to get out of the research. There are lots of other things that I will be sort of publishing from over the next sort of year or two. So really what I'm hoping to do is that improve the sort of knowledge available about what it is to live and experience with recurrent DK, and hopefully being able to use some of that to inform and make some suggestions for future care delivery and how we start to change things. And that's really my research as it is at the moment.
Thank you so much, Emma, for sharing that. Was there anyone on the panel that had a question for Emma? We've got a few minutes before we head over to Australia with Belinda, but is anyone on the panel got a question for Emma?
Nope, I'm all good at the moment.
Emma, so when do you see the final publication being published? You say a couple of years, is that right?
Yes, yeah. So probably about another 18 months
Yes.
before I go forwards for examination, realistically.
And can you?
Because I also work full time at the moment.
And what do you do as a full-time job as well?
So I'm a lecturer in advanced clinical practice. So help manage the MSc and also help teach prescribing as well at the university. So quite a busy and varied job.
Absolutely, and that all stems back from your time as a lead diabetes specialist nurse as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when I did my BSc, I helped develop a diabetic ketoacidosis to care pathway some time ago now. And I think I've always been sort of interested in the stories behind and just trying to improve care. But this is doing things in a different way.
And in terms of your participants, what's the sort of age range that have taken part?
Yeah, so they're all under 30, and all but one of them were diagnosed in childhood. So either, actually in childhood or in adolescence as well. So some of the challenges that continue through that journey of, living with diabetes for probably over half their lives for some of them.
Yeah. And is it some of them quite recent and some, like you say, afterlife since like last 10 years ago? What's the sort of age bracket on when they got DK?
So I think the shortest diagnosis was about 2 years after I first met them, and then probably about 16, 17 years post. DK sort of seems to appear at different times.
Yeah, are you finding that it's in comparison to the people that were diagnosed 16 years ago to now, things have changed for the better and the worse? Are there similarities between participants, or can you see clear differences without obviously giving too much away?
Yeah, I think I haven't really started analysing my second round of data, but I think when you listen there, I think there is quite a difference emerging. I thought tech would make a bigger difference, and it certainly does from day to day, but then the downside of that for some people is that always being connected, always seeing, chasing the numbers, the guilt that the numbers bring. So yeah, it's a tricky one sometimes, really.
Well, thank you again for coming on and sharing your amazing research. Obviously, we'll all keep a watchful eye on all the developments over the next 18 months or so, and it's been nice just kind of hearing a glimpse of the amazing things that you're doing. And thank you so much, Emma.
Cheers, thank you.
You're very welcome. So amazing, guys. We've had 3 amazing speakers on the panel this evening sharing their research and their background, and I hope that you guys are enjoying it. I'm seeing some lovely comments on the hashtag, so if you do want to get involved, you can hashtag DiabetesChat, or you can tweet along any comments, or directly send the people on the panel a message, a tweet, if you've got any comments or questions to what they've said or their research, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer that. Or at the end, we'll have a little Q&A if there's any questions. So I'm going to head back over to the States, and Chris hopefully will introduce Belinda, who's in Australia.
Do we have Belinda on the panel yet?
I think she might have dropped off, so let me invite Belinda back on.
I was gonna say, I know we've been sort of running out of space on the on the panel a little bit.
Brilliant stuff. Over to you, Chris.
All right, I see she's up now. Hello, Belinda.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Beautiful.
All right, just as by way of a introduction, Belinda is a registered midwife and diabetes educator. We mentioned that she is in Australia, in Victoria, studying psychology, and her master's thesis is investigating the first year of parenthood for fathers with type 1 diabetes and how it impacts their management, emotional well-being, and the father-child relationship, which is interesting. And I realize that a lot of the sort of focus on neonatal and the period immediately following childbirth focuses on the mother relationship. So it's interesting to see that someone's looking into what happens with the fathers. So over to you, Belinda.
Thanks very much, Chris, and thanks to everyone at DiabetesChat for having me here. I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional lands that I come from today. It probably doesn't mean very much from most of you in the Northern Hemisphere, but it's very important to us here down under. The traditional landowners on the land that I come from is the Yorta Yorta people, and they're the traditional Indigenous people that created this space for us. So yeah, just in case there are any Indigenous people from Australia that have dialed in today, I'd like to acknowledge their presence and their leadership. I feel very humbled to be amongst everyone here today because I'm incredibly junior in the research world, and I don't profess to be a researcher at this stage. I do aspire to be a clinician researcher, but I'm certainly very, very junior, and I'm learning a lot because I try to hang out with all the good people, which is all you people here today. And I thought I'd actually just continue on with the really beautiful theme of how important it is to involve community and the lived experience in research from the get-go. So I thought I'd just talk about how I came up with my research idea. Just stepping back a little bit, I sort of fell into the diabetes education world, and I definitely fell into research as well. I was actually an anthropologist before I moved into healthcare, working with the Hill Tribe people in northern Thailand. And then when I moved back to Australia, incredibly hard to find work as an anthropologist. So I followed my grandmother's and mother's footsteps and became a nurse. And it was when I was actually working in the Kimberley that I fell into diabetes education. Everyone thinks I became a diabetes educator because my brother has type 1, but that's not actually the reason. And so after some years working clinically as a nurse, a midwife, mostly in the paediatric and midwifery field, I fell into diabetes and pregnancy. Not a lot of midwives put their hand up to become involved in diabetes. I think my honest belief is that they find it very confronting. They don't understand it. It's very medical. A lot of midwives go into midwifery for the simplistic nature of childbirth and normal vaginal births and low intervention, but the reality of having diabetes in pregnancy is very opposite. It can be very confronting, very interventional, very medical. It is a medical condition. And it was actually when I was working in paediatric diabetes that I became involved in research, and I started working with the ENDIA study, ENDIA, which you can Google. It's a Australian-wide study, and this is how my research topic evolved for my master's thesis, which I'm currently doing. It's a Master of Clinical Research at the University of Melbourne, and my research topic developed as it should through conversation with community, and through that conversation is how I identified the knowledge gap. And I think that the most important thing that we learn as research students is that your research will be successful, the most successful, when you're really trying to answer that gap in knowledge or that gap in clinical services. So I would go to work with the ENDIA study. It's a study where there's 1,500 children across Australia in the study. They've all got a parent or a sibling with type 1 diabetes. They're in the study before they're born until they're 10 years of age, and they're in the study because they are helping the researchers and the scientists trying to identify what are the environmental triggers to type 1 diabetes as well as celiac disease. And they from a very young age, provide all sorts of samples, stool samples, urine samples, skin swabs, mouth swabs, blood tests, and the parents provide an enormous amount of questionnaires about lifestyle and parenting and childhood and sleeping and settling, all that sort of thing. And it was when I would do the study visits. I'd probably do about 8 visits a day, mostly in the home. So you develop a very close rapport with the participants. Very, very special professional relationships. You get to know the families or the parents at very vulnerable times or confronting times, i.e. during their pregnancy. I attended many, many births, which is very, very special time and very humbling for me to be a part of because I had to collect the placenta and the cord blood. And then you're watching these children grow up as well. And it was actually during a lot of the study visits on individual occasions with the partners of the fathers with type 1 diabetes. Often it was the mothers doing the study visits with the children because traditionally the fathers were away at work. And a lot of these mothers started, independently of one another, started commenting, I had to call an ambulance again for my partner. They had a significant hypoglycemic episode, or a couple of other mothers were saying he'd had another DKA episode. A couple of others were mentioning that they were mixing up their long-acting and short-acting insulins because they were just so tired. And I started to think inside my mind, there's a bit of a theme here. These poor fathers are trying to manage their type 1 diabetes as well as their new roles of fatherhood. And this is all happening within the first year of fatherhood, anecdotally. And I thought to myself, no one prepares these fathers for fatherhood. As Chris alluded to, pregnancy care is so focused on the women. And COVID has made that worse, particularly here in Victoria where we had the harshest lockdowns, gratefully, during 2020 and 2021. So a lot of fathers did not attend one single antenatal visit, and that has been very challenging for the couples, especially for the fathers. And so it has made that pregnancy care even more women-centred, whereas pregnancy care should be family-centred, not women-centred. So I really wanted to try and understand what is the impact of fatherhood on the father's diabetes management, their mental health, as well as going forward, their relationship with that child born within that experience. And so we have some really fantastic opportunities for us research students here in Australia. Diabetes Victoria have a scholarship, the Tricia Dunning Scholarship. Tricia Dunning sadly passed away last year, but she was a very well-known and respected nurse, diabetes educator and researcher, known nationally and internationally, and the scholarship is in honour of her work that she's done. And I submitted an application and they gratefully awarded me part of that scholarship. I think 40,000 Australian dollars has gone to a PhD student and then 20,000 has gone to my master's research. So I'm really grateful on behalf of the fathers with type 1 and the fathers-to-be. So what I'll be looking at is a qualitative study and doing some focus groups and surveys very, very soon to start. To really understand this very important need. But outside of that, I'm actually working on another study, which again is very, very community centred, and that's with the Indigenous people here in Victoria, Shepparton, Victoria. It's a randomised controlled study over 6 months' time, and the Indigenous people that are enrolled in the study have type 2 diabetes and they're on insulin, and they're either using the flash glucose sensors or they're doing usual care, which is finger pricking, and we're trying to ascertain, because there's just no data using these devices in type 2 in the Indigenous population, trying to ascertain, does the flash glucose sensor reduce the HbA1c, reduce the burden of care, and also reduce the risk of diabetes complications. I won't go too much more into that because I'm running out of time. Happy to have any questions.
Thank you, Belinda. I thought that was really fascinating and really hits home for me personally as well, because my son Harry was actually born during the first lockdown back in 2020. It seems such a long time ago now, doesn't it? And I do remember, for me, prior to Harry coming, I actually felt my diabetes is in a pretty good place. And then the lockdown period hit, and actually for my sort of emotional well-being and mental health, it actually my diabetes kind of went out the window a little bit, because I was trying to like manage having a child during this pandemic, and it was a tough time, and it definitely did impact on my diabetes care and management. But it took a while for me to kind of come out of that. You might think, oh, you're at home, and because I was working from home, I was a teacher, but I was told to work from home because of my diabetes, and maybe, I don't know, maybe some may think you might be more on top of it because you might have the time, maybe, I don't know, but for me it was a complete odd situation I was in.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it did impact on my diabetes. But yeah, I found that really interesting, and I look forward to reading more and find out more about it.
Even just the broken sleep that a parent will have because
Yes.
of a little person in your house. I mean, that influence on your overnight, basal requirements
Of course,
and glucose levels
And
is huge. But all we need to do is just have the conversation. The endocrinologists and the diabetes educators that are seeing you guys is just have that conversation and plant the seed.
yeah, absolutely.
Awareness. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, then you can, of course, send Belinda a message. You can tweet along to her, or at the end, if there's any questions, we'll have a little short Q&A in about 10 minutes time. So if anyone has any questions for her, please get them in. But thank you for coming on today to our research event all the way from Victoria, Australia. It's what, is it 7:30 your time now?
Yes, 7:30.
There we go.
The dog's still snoring.
Bless you so much. But it's been really interesting, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, guys, again, if you want to get involved, you can hashtag DiabetesChat or request the microphone. And when we have our Q&A shortly, please come speak to Jill and Emma and Belinda. Tracey is listening in, so if there's any questions to her and Simon, please get involved and come chat. So our last guest speaker is Tracey, and Tracey is in Australia as well. And Tracey is a PhD candidate at the University of Technology, Sydney. Tracey has a background with undergraduate training in human services and postgraduate training in psychology and counselling, with industry experience in counselling, particularly with women with chronic disease. Her PhD project is looking at the health service use of women with diabetes and the comorbid anxiety and or depression. Tracey is on the line. She's listening. She's actually currently on a train going to work. She's got some other meetings that she's got on today, but she has recorded a recording for us. So I'm going to play that, and then if there's any questions, we will, of course, invite you guys to tweet along and ask Tracey, and I'm sure she'll tweet along as well and get back to you. So we'll head over to Tracey for her research.
Hi everyone, Tracey Oorschot here, and thank you for inviting me on tonight's Diabetes Chat. I'm in my final year as a PhD candidate in the School of Public Health at the University of Technology, Sydney. My PhD is looking at the health service use behaviours of women with diabetes and comorbid anxiety or depression. Before I give you an overview of my research, I have to first let you know that I'm a pet parent of an 11-year-old Cavalier King Charles Spaniel named Tram. who was diagnosed with diabetes about 18 months ago. Fortunately for him, I'm a diabetes researcher and was onto his symptoms pretty quickly. The same issues around delayed diagnosis with humans occurs with canines. That is, the symptoms can be put down to a range of other conditions. It is also critical for animals to see their vet quickly, as their shorter lifespan means the condition can progress more quickly, resulting in animals typically presenting to the vet clinic very unwell. Tramp is on insulin twice a day and a strict lifestyle medicine regimen, as that's the only tools in the shed to keep him well. And he is very well and has been in glycemic control for more than a year. Much more to say on that, but that will have to keep for a separate talk on pets with diabetes. So back to my research with humans. I've researched the health service use behaviours of women with diabetes and comorbid mental health. Firstly, mental health affects around half of the people living with diabetes, and women are more at risk of already having or developing either psychological distress, anxiety, or depression. Secondly, women have some unique health behaviours compared to men, with the main difference being the high use of complementary medicine. Complementary medicine is anything that falls outside what we would consider conventional healthcare, such as the use of herbal medicine products or meditation or consulting with a naturopath. Complementary medicine use has risks and benefits in the context of diabetes care. A woman with diabetes isn't typically asked if they use complementary medicine or not. People who use complementary medicines also typically use them in conjunction with conventional medicine, but often don't disclose this use to their healthcare provider. This is where some clinical governance risks like contraindications can become an issue. To assist diabetes clinicians, it is important that we first understand what health services people are using, and then we can explore why, as all these contact points are opportunities to support diabetes care. For people who are known high users of complementary medicine, such as women, it is especially important to have a conversation around if they're using herbal medicine products that might potentially interact with their diabetes medications. Some herb drug interactions can have additive effects, meaning they might be contributing to hypos. Also, there are benefits to complementary medicine. One aspect I'm trying to discover is if the use patterns I'm analysing point to use of health services entirely in relation to supporting mental health, or are people knowingly supporting their mental health to support their physiological health, such as managing their blood glucose levels. For my PhD, I completed secondary analyses of 3 databases to see what health service use patterns emerged grouped by mental health status. One results paper is published, with the other 2 under review, and hopefully they'll be published shortly. My preliminary findings indicate that a woman's mental health status is influencing their choice of healthcare provider, practice, or products. Whilst it might be fairly obvious for physical health conditions such as comorbid cardiovascular issues to predict consultation with a specialist, for example, mental health care is less obvious. Not everyone seeks mental health care, and those who wish to see a psychologist or counsellor might be confronted with a long waiting list or high out-of-pocket costs, and so choose something else to support their mental health. One interesting finding is that whilst women with diabetes and anxiety were more likely to practice yoga or meditation, women with depression were more likely to visit a psychologist or counsellor. Another interesting finding is women with comorbid mental health had higher use rates of consulting with practitioners such as their GP than those with diabetes only, as well as higher use rates of herbal medicines than those with diabetes only. An overall key finding is that it's very important within diabetes care to have a conversation around mental health. Whilst women are identified high users of complementary medicine, it doesn't mean men don't use complementary medicine either. Risk of use cannot be managed if a diabetes clinician isn't aware that their patient has a preference for complementary medicine use. On the benefits side, if exercise is difficult, yoga can be suggested as an alternative exercise and likely to be incorporated into their self-management care routine. One of the limitations of my study is that some key diabetes practitioners are not part of the databases I analysed, such as endocrinologists and diabetes educators. My future direction is to survey people with diabetes, whether male or female, and ask more specific questions around why they see who they see, to discover how we can best support specific cohorts of people with diabetes. For example, complementary medicine practitioners do not typically form part of diabetes care teams, so where do conventional medicine practitioners go for advice around how to support someone who chooses to use complementary medicine as part of their self-management care routine? Do we know if people show a preference for consulting with a diabetes educator about their mental health in comparison to, say, a psychologist, but they simply don't have access to a diabetes educator? These are the types of questions I have forming in my mind for a future research project. The final part of my PhD project is currently underway, and involves asking diabetes care questions directly to naturopaths and herbalists who are most commonly consulted by people with diabetes. I'm looking to cross-reference the findings from my secondary analyses with their responses. My main thesis argument is the need for coordinated diabetes care that involves both conventional and complementary medicine practitioners to support the needs of women with diabetes, who are known to use both conventional and complementary medicine concurrently. What I aim to achieve is to raise awareness amongst diabetes clinicians that women with diabetes have been identified as high users of complementary medicine, and it is prudent to check to see what risks or benefits accompany that use. I also aim to align with increased awareness around the need to support the mental health needs of people with diabetes, particularly around recognising that people with diabetes choose a diverse range of strategies to support their mental health. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you to Tracey for that and joining us on the diabetes chat. It was amazing listening to that recording, Tracey. And one of the things interesting for me is that important element to have that conversation around mental health. It's so important to talk and reach out to people and connect, and hopefully that can help sort of reduce maybe some anxieties or feelings of depression, because we know how difficult diabetes is, how tough it is. It's relentless at 24/7, never stops, never goes away. And for people with type 1 diabetes, at this stage, there's no cure, or there's no reverse or nothing like that. So a hugely important piece of research that you're doing, Tracey, and appreciate everything you're doing, and look forward to seeing and hearing more about it. And if anyone has any questions for Tracey, then you can tweet along hashtag DiabetesChat, or you can tag Tracey into that, and I'm sure she will get back to you with her responses over the course of the day. But it's just been so fascinating just listening to our amazing 5 guest speakers today, sharing their research, but also their background to where they got, their journey of their background, and how they connected to the diabetes world. And we're so appreciative for all the efforts they do in their roles, and it's been really fascinating chatting and hearing their research today. So now for the next 10-15 minutes is a sort of open Q&A. So if you want to come and speak to Simon, Professor Simon Heller, Belinda Moore, Emma Innes, and Dr. Jill Charlton, and also Tracey is on for tweets as well. You can tweet along Diabetes Chat, or you can request a mic. Come ask them questions if the guy is still around. So I've got a few questions on the hashtags coming through, but was there any questions on the panel? We've got Chris, we've got Claire, Norman, Sam's there, and also the panelists that have spoken today. Did you have any questions for your fellow researchers? We'll take this opportunity to ask the panel first, and if anyone wants to come join the discussion, then get involved.
Well, I wanted to, less a question and more of a compliment. Thank you to looking at just the way the research is being conducted amongst the various panelists. We're running the extreme from doing clamps in a laboratory or in a clinical setting, and measuring hormone levels and responses and things like that, all the way to the sort of soft end of the doing surveys. And I think in a lot of cases, the surveys actually can be undervalued because it's harder to make a precise measurement of something that isn't necessarily quantitative. But as people with diabetes are gaining more and more access to technology, now I've got an insulin pump that can tell me exactly how much insulin it gave me and when. I've got a CGM that I can tell exactly how, what my blood sugar did in response and in response to other things that are going on. I think surveys may actually become a super cost-effective method if we just ask people about what they're doing with their diabetes management. So it's great to see all of the various methods, and it's always interesting to hear what the ways are that we're measuring the various things that researchers want to look at. The diversity is fantastic.
Could I, Simon Hallaher, could I make a comment about that? Because I'm working with Jill on the hyper-resolve, and one of the reasons that we've measured boring things, you could say, like hormones and hemoglobin A1, which we've been tied to, is because the people who fund treatments, the FDA, the European Medicines Agency, and other people who decide how much will be reimbursed in any country, have said it's all about blood glucose levels. And what they have failed to take into account is the effect that new medications, new technology has on people. And in other words, quality of life, and as Jill has explained, it's not just quality of life, it's other much more sophisticated measures. And that it's taken a lot of persuasion, and we're just nearly there. Because if you want to bring the latest and best treatments to market and then get them paid for, you have to demonstrate benefit, cost effectiveness. And I think, as we all know, diabetes is so much more than, you're not a walking HbA1c or a blood glucose. You're people who have to live their lives well with diabetes. And I think it's a good thing that we're now measuring them, but they all have their place. And hopefully you can use them to the advantage of people with diabetes.
Yeah, thank you for that, Simon. I completely agree. As I would being an instrument developer, I think it's an exciting time across the board. As I mentioned earlier, there's a number of different ways in which we're looking at quality of life now and trying to measure quality of life. And there's some people already doing some sterling work in this area, but as I say, there's some other things that still need to be done. I've just come back from a quality of life conference in Prague, and their quality of life researchers researching all different type of health conditions. And let's not forget, health conditions don't discriminate. Health conditions don't work in isolation. Many people live with more than one health condition, and we need to understand what quality of life means across the lifespan. So, from childhood through to adolescence, through to adulthood, and through to towards end of life. And, as a society, things change. What was important to us at different times of our life will change. But also, we've got all these fantastic advances in medicine and care. People are living longer, and we're experiencing consequences of that as well, and on a societal level. So I think we need to think very carefully about how we can demonstrate those benefits, because when we look at sort of cost effectiveness, it's not just about increasing the length of time in which we live, but it's also improving quality of life within it, which is kind of what we're trying to measure in the instruments that we develop. And as I mentioned earlier on, to capture those things, working with people in the community is crucial, and it has to be collaborative. And also, I think the things such as like real world data, so regular measurement of these things and understanding that and spotting patterns, and as one of the speakers alluded to, is sort of continually looking for those areas where we just don't know, we just don't get it. And I think we've all got a role to play in that.
Yeah, I think it's very telling that the sort of standard of measurement that they use for determining cost effectiveness is quality adjusted life years. If you improve the quality, you're actually gaining some quality adjusted life years because the adjustment is higher.
Absolutely. So some interventions in healthcare don't necessarily increase somebody's life expectancy, but it can sure as hell improve their quality of life. And those things deserve to be funded just as much as anything else.
Okay, Tom, I'm done derailing the.
No worries. I thought it was really good. Simon, I had a question for you. A little bit about Daphne. Could you maybe just explain what Daphne is for the people that are tuned in that don't know what Daphne is a little bit more, and what do you see as the benefits of Daphne, and do you think that Daphne can be more widely available for people more quicker from when they were diagnosed? Like, for example, with me, I was diagnosed in 2006, and then I didn't attend Daphne until 2015, I think it was. So it was a long time, and for them many years, I was essentially winging it. I was told to take this set amount of insulin for either set meals, or maybe be a bit more generous, take a bit more when you're having things like pizza and things like that. So, but since I went on Daphne, I've like, it's changed my life. On top of like the technological advances that's improved my diabetes care. But yeah, a few little questions about Daphne for you.
Okay, so I think the first thing to say is that in the 90s, as I briefly mentioned, diabetes was in a real mess in the UK. We realized that carbohydrate exchanges, as they were called, had been used to control people's lives, probably not deliberately, although I'm not so sure. That doctors they like to be in charge. And there was a big pushback. You can't use, even doctors began to realize you can't ask people to eat the same amount of food at the same time every day. And so we were left with nothing. And actually, dietitians were having a tough time in the 90s. And then when we went to Germany and saw this, it was giving freedom to people. And in fact, we could say you can eat like everybody else. But you have to use skills, and it's incredibly skillful. And it's not altogether practical, to say to people, we want you to judge how many carbs you're going to eat before you eat them. And so quite a few people used to take their insulin afterwards. But nevertheless, the skills, which were structured, they were taught in a structured way. Mm-hmm. People were taught in groups of 6 to 8, face to face, and they could share their experience. Again, very important. Do I think people should do Daphne right at the start of their diabetes life? Of course they should. Within 6 to 12 months, it would be my view.
Yes.
And then they have the skills.
What would be the reason for that? Do you think that people need to kind of see for themselves what diabetes is all about rather than bombarding you with too much information? Like, some people might want that, but what's your personal view on that?
Well, I think that it has. Well, the first thing it has to be part of treatment. What's really depressing, even in the UK right now, is that around 40 to 50% now of adults with type 1 diabetes are offered some kind of structured education. Of course, I'd say that Daphne is the gold standard because it's backed by evidence. But the other programs are probably just about as good. We don't know because they're rarely audited, which Daphne is, and they don't have much research to try and improve them, which we're currently doing. But I think that, and you said yourself, and Chris mentioned that you're using technology, but for goodness sakes, if you have the skills and understand what's it doing, you're much more likely to find benefit. We did a study called Repose, a trial where we randomized people to use pumps and Daphne training or regular injections and Daphne training. And there was no significant difference in HbA1c. I think there were some quality of life benefits for some people with pumps. And so my view is, of course, people should have technology. Not everybody wants pumps. It's diabetes in your face. And one of the benefits, I think, is because you're using that technology. In order to use it, you're bound to have to acquire some skills. But to have the understanding of what diabetes management is about, it means you can make the most of your CGM, you can make the most of your pumps, and even with hybrid closed loop, which is the latest, you still have to declare meals, you still have to take exercise into account, because the insulin we give people isn't the right kind of insulin, it's not given in the right place. So training, and I use the word training because education is kind of a dirty word to doctors, because they say, oh, that's something, and I use the words carefully, they're nurses and dietitians do. We're far too clever to do that. But the healthcare professional has to say, this is your treatment. This is a life-saving, wonderful, 100-year-old treatment, but it's potentially dangerous. If you don't take enough, as we've heard, you get DKA. If you take too much, you're going to have hypoglycemia, which can be pretty awful. So the idea that people are just given this drug and told to wing it is absolutely shameful. I mean, and so we're trying to make Daphne better, and we're just doing a big trial, which kind of got screwed up a bit by COVID. But we're going to finish it in a year, and we're using technology, we're using structured support, and the other thing is Daphne is taught in Australia, particularly in Victoria and other parts. It's used in Kuwait. We're hoping to export it to Pakistan, and we've had some Spanish visitors from Central America, and so hopefully we can persuade those countries to take it on as well. So, and anybody who wants to come to learn it in other countries, if they can persuade their health professionals to come over, we will do it. But I think, Daphne, to try and manage your diabetes without proper training is incredibly hard anyway. But to do it like that is just crazy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Got a few questions for Emma, and I know Flipper's jumped on the line, so I'll bounce Flipper in a second. Emma, but for your research, does the research capture the emotional effect of life-threatening DKA on family members?
Not specifically on the family member, although my participants talk quite a lot about their place within the family, and particularly siblings, and how that alters the sort of family dynamics. But no, I haven't interviewed other people.
Thank you for that. That was from Ola. And Flipper, I think you had a question for Emma as well, I believe.
Yeah, hi. Sorry if I drop out. I've got really bad Wi-Fi at the minute. But Emma, I was quite interested when I was listening to your portion. I unfortunately missed the beginning, people who spoke, that you were saying you were speaking to people who had experience of more than one DKA, obviously including diagnosis. And I wondered if anybody you spoke to, had they all gone into DKA at home as such, or did you speak to any people who were put into DKA whilst in patients?
That's a really interesting question. So 3, I think of my 5 participants had DKA at the point of diagnosis, but then had it a number of times subsequently. But that initial bit obviously stayed with people in quite a profound way. I had one participant who, when you heard the story, was on the cusp of going back into DKA during that hospital admission. So it had resolved, and it appeared then that one thing and another, with perhaps less than ideal management, they were on the cusp of DKA again, but not particularly looking at that
Okay. No, I just wondered because I know myself, I had an experience that I'd managed to keep myself out of DKA, was admitted to hospital, and whilst they're treating me, they put me into DKA.
Yeah, and I think from talking to my participants, one of the things that struck me and surprised me as well about the lack of urgency that often, like the emergency department, appeared to the participants to be treating their admission and instigating treatment. And I wasn't interested in the hows and whys of what might be going on in a hospital setting. We know they're obviously busy, but that certainly resonated with several of the participants as well, in, you know, that they weren't seen as very important. And when they pitched up in A&E, they may be, oh, you know, why haven't you taken, one of the first words to one of them was, why haven't you taken your insulin? Well, I didn't know I'd got type 1 diabetes, so that was probably why. So that judgment and stigma right from the get-go, I think, you know, resonated across the group as well, unfortunately.
Okay, that's really interesting. I'm going to jump now to Simon. Unfortunately, Simon, I didn't hear your talk because I joined late to hear you. But I just have one question, if you wouldn't mind. A bit like Tom, I did Daphne 17 years after I was diagnosed, and it was life-changing. It was amazing, and I didn't realise how much I didn't know and had never been told. And I was diagnosed as an adult, so it wasn't that I was a child who hadn't picked it up. But that was in 2012. What are your thoughts on people doing refreshers or those being offered? Just because I know from talks we've had on here that actually the guidance has changed since I did it, but obviously I'm not updated on that guidance.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think people might do refreshers for two reasons. The one is that you're right, guidance changes and exercise, recommendations on exercise can change. I still think one of the most important things from teaching self-management is leaving a gap between injecting quick-acting insulin and eating. And of course, it's very impractical. I'm not unaware that it's kind of crazy to say you should wait 30 to 45 minutes before you eat. But that's how long so-called quick insulin takes to work. Maybe FIASP, when it's used, is a little bit quicker, but nevertheless. So things change. And of course, CGM helps you to realize if you leave a gap, you can see the benefit because you don't get a rise in your glucose. So the other reason, and this is more to do with Daphne Plus, which is what we're trying to trial and develop at the moment, is people find it very challenging to sustain the Daphne self-management course and self-management because of the arduous way we've talked about it, the challenge to the maths, and quite a few people do find it difficult to calculate dose. And we did some lovely qualitative research done by Julia Lawton in Scotland some years afterwards, and she showed that people tend to stop eating so flexibly because it's just less of a hassle. And so we've tried to put new stuff in to Daphne, which we're trialing at the moment, where we, for the first year, people talk regularly to a diabetes nurse specialist or a dietitian, and they share their glucose results and their insulin doses. So they get ongoing support for a year, because what we think is a 1 week course or 1 day a week for 5 weeks is just not enough, and we should be giving people proper structured support. And those extra additions, we hope, will make a real difference. But I still think refreshers are a good idea. We probably should have online training available. And of course, the internet allows that to happen if you're prepared to search for it. So all those things, I think, can make a difference. But the most important thing, do you know what it is? It's healthcare professionals saying, this is an essential part of your treatment. It's not an optional extra. And yet, so many of my colleagues don't get it.
Yeah, it would be great, though, this is just talking personally, if maybe every I don't know how often things change on the course. So maybe every 4 years. I don't know if that's a reasonable thing, or 5 years. Do you know what I mean? If you just issued either bit on a podcast, or if there were a course advice, just with the updates. So
I think that's a really good idea.
Glycemia.
I think it's a great idea. In fact, that the Daphne community we do have podcasts, and you can go on their website. I'm still on the executive committee, so I'm going to go back to Jill Thompson and colleagues in North Tyneside and say, look, let's put this on the podcast. Let's make sure that we have refreshers with some extra things that we're bringing in. It's a really great idea. Thank you for that.
You could do a newsletter with like a PDF as well.
Yeah,
or something similar.
Yeah, good idea. Really good suggestion.
Either of those, because you could put them out on social media, because I know Daphne's on social media, but also the health professionals that really, when I say push, that sounds really aggressive, but are really supportive of Daphne. But that would get out to quite a community. And I do feel at times you talk to somebody and you're saying, oh, well, on Daphne it said that. And they say, no, it doesn't. It says this. And I'm like, well, when I did it, it said that.
Okay. No, these are really great suggestions, very great practical things, which I think I'm going to take back and share with colleagues.
Because a lot of us, we do follow the Daphne principles. I still do it, and fair enough, I adapt them to my lifestyle, but I basically do Daphne. And if things have changed, I only need, do you know what I mean? I don't need to redo the course. I just need to know the updates.
Yeah, it's really good ideas, actually. Thank you for that. I will take that back.
That'd be brilliant. Thank you. Sorry, I will now let other people in.
Brilliant little discussion there, Flipper and Simon. Thank you so much. If anyone has any sort of final questions for our end of our second diabetes research event, now is your opportunity to ask the panelists, or you can tweet along, send them a tweet, and I'm sure they'll get back to you. But so many lovely messages on the hashtag coming through, and there's a few little discussions going on. I can see Nick Wood and Tracey conversing some discussion there, so that's nice following her presentation. So yeah, brilliant stuff. Maybe just to conclude to our panelists, was there anything else you wanted to add to conclude our evening tonight?
I'd just like to say that I think your community, the community is very powerful. So if you see something that is not sitting right, or something that you want changing, then you have a very, very powerful voice. And I feel that this is where people like myself tell us what you want changing, tell us what's not working, and we will work with you to try and find that evidence to make those changes happen.
So that's great, and I think that's one of the great things of the Diabetes Chat community, is that having these opportunities to speak to people like you guys, whether it's people as consultants or researchers. We've had different people come on who are sports athletes, and we've allowed the community to interact with them and ask questions, and then, like you say, Jill, it's if there's anything that's on our mind, then we can pass it to you guys and see how you guys can support us further, because I think this is the sort of modern era that we're in terms of social media and technology, and it's just wonderful to have these opportunities to talk and listen, because I'm sure people have heard it many times, but it's something like, is it 0.2% of the time or 2% that you get to see your consultant or your diabetes team, and the rest of the time you're on your own essentially. So having these opportunities to listen and chat with you guys and learn things, and hopefully for you guys to learn things from our point of view as well, it's very rewarding, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Fantastic. Honestly, thank you to all of you guys for coming on today. Dr. Jill Charlton, thank you so much. Professor Simon Heller, Belinda Moore, Emma Innes, and Tracey Oorschot are fantastic 5 speakers that have come on for our Diabetes Chat research event. It's been fabulous. There's been so many lovely comments on Twitter on the hashtag, and it's been nice seeing people tuned in. Claire, I see your hand is raised.
I just wanted to ask, is the Daphnia course available for people with type 2 diabetes?
It's a very good question, and we're debating it. What we think is, for people who are needing multiple injections of insulin, it fits pretty well. But actually, just a few weeks ago, we had a meeting and felt we probably should be offering them so that everybody in the group has type 2. And that's going to be explored because, of course, younger and younger people are getting type 2, unfortunately. And the skills that you need for insulin, particularly if you're taking more than 1 or 2 injections a day, is absolutely the same. So it's something we're exploring, and we're going to see whether we can develop it. But it's not available for most places at the moment.
Thank you, Sue, for that. It's only I'm type 2 actually, but I'm on 4 injections a day, and I am struggling with a lot of hypos. So I think benefited.
Well, if you can find one locally, you might find. We do take people on, but we think we probably should be developing a particular course. But many Daphne centres do include people with type 2 diabetes, and there's other types of diabetes, one called pancreatic diabetes, and they do have those people on the course as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Claire. And again, thank you to our panellists for your time this evening, coming on and talking to the Diabetes Chat community. We look forward to seeing all the amazing research that you guys are continuing in doing, and thank you for all the efforts that you do in providing a fantastic service and support to people with diabetes. So thank you so much.
Pleasure.
So guys, welcome along to the Diabetes Chat. Wow, what another amazing evening we've had, speaking to 5 amazing guest speakers on our research event. It's been tremendous, and I hope that you guys took away something from tonight, because it's lovely to hear, isn't it? And the work that the guys are doing is brilliant. I think we had 5 diverse topics, like Chris summarised, by far better than I can. But it is truly amazing, and really appreciate their time and coming on. So what time it is? 10:15. So we have around 45 minutes of the Diabetes Chat